Welcome to the Unworthy Leader Podcast, a show that shatters the illusion of perfect leadership. Here we expose the flaws, doubts, and insecurities behind the titles, proving that true leadership isn't about being worthy. It's about owning your unworthiness and leading anyway. If you're tired of the polished facades, you've come to the right place. You'll hear the raw truth from leaders you admire and trust. I'm Kendra Dahlstrom, your host and executive coach to the Fortune 500 C-suite. Let's get started.
Steve, it is a joy to have you here today with me on the Unworthy Leader podcast. Steve Mellor is a former competitive swimmer and coach at really prestigious universities and with U.S. Olympian. He also runs a company called Growth Ready, which helps leaders unlock their optimal self. Steve, I know you can do a better job of introducing yourself than I can. It's really great to have you here, and please introduce yourself.
I appreciate it, Kendra. Firstly, I have to acknowledge I'm so happy, excited, proud of you for doing this podcast. The world needs more Kendra Dahlstrom. The world needs more conversation around what it is you're providing to us around this unworthy notion that we wrestle with and that we deal with and we try to work through as leaders. I know I see it all the time in my work. So what a wonderful cause. I'm excited to be here just to serve that cause and that mission of the podcast. But in terms of who I am, for someone that talks for a living, the one thing I'm awful and always refrain from doing is talking about myself. So yeah, anyway, British born, Baton Rouge based is what I tell everybody now. And so I've been in Louisiana for about 12 years. I've been married to a gal from Louisiana for 6 of those years. We have a couple of British Cajuns now that run around our house causing chaos. And as far as I'm concerned, in terms of how I show up in this world now, as you said there in introduction, I'm an executive coach. I focus on what it means for an individual to not simply become their optimal self, but do the work behind pursuing that version of yourself. And I think we'll probably get into that as it's the pursuit of it where we really struggle with. We see this capability and this potential we have so often, and it goes unnoticed. It goes underserviced for some reason. And I think we'll probably get into what some of those reasons are today. So
yeah, and that's why I thought you'd be such a great guest, is not only because I know your own personal story, I also know the kinds of clients you work with. And thank you for acknowledging the podcast. I will be fully transparent in that this is something I wanted to do since I first met you, which is almost 3 years ago now. And what kept me back from doing it was imposter syndrome. I wasn't ready. Everyone has a podcast. Who's going to listen to me? Why me? Why do I think what I have to say is so important? And so it was so interesting as I went through my own little health crises this summer. Coming out of that, what came forward for me was this notion of serving. It doesn't have to be about me. I'm just the podcast host. The people I have on as guests are the stars. And what if I take reality TV and podcast and mash it up and expose this idea that I struggle with self-doubt and unworthiness, and I try to unpack it and learn about it by bringing in all sorts of different people from different industries and career sectors and learn from them while helping the audience too. Everyone kind of hides it and whispers it, but nobody actually wants to say it out loud. On that note, how do you define optimal self?
Oh, great question. So for me, it's a version of you that more likely than not you've known for a long time that you've been too scared to get to know well. And so I preface it with that mainly because I believe if you sit down right now and say, okay, Steve, I think I have an optimal self, and I'm going to ask you to explain that and describe who that version of you is. And you're probably going to backtrack a number of years. You're going to mention something from a long time ago. Well, when I was this age, I always felt I could do this. I was capable of this. And then at some point, you've gone into the educational system, you've got your first job, you've been busy getting married, having family, all this kind of thing. And whatever that picture was at some point got put on the mantle and just got forgot about. It's not been given a lot of attention for a long time. And believe it or not, we can still be what most would say from the outside looking in, a success. We can be a success and still not be pursuing our optimal self. And so many of my clients wrestle with this. Is here they are coming to me as an executive coach, and they meet me in this space of hey, we're in a high performance, high growth point of our journey as a company. And as an executive or an executive team, we feel as though we can be performing better. And so we get into the heart of what does better look like? For us to get better, we have to have this image, this idea of something that is greater than where we're at right now. And then I get to go into because typically we don't get into the optimal self right away because it is much deeper, much more personal work. We start with some of these more general concepts of simply, what does it look like to get better? And then once you get a little bit more rapport and trust with the client, we can start to dive into the optimal self a little bit more. Like, why do you feel as though you're not showing up as a leader as your optimal self? What are you leaving at the door and been leaving at the door for many, many years to show up in this space, assuming that you don't need that stuff? It turns out you may actually need that stuff. In fact, that could be the missing ingredient for how you deal with everything that you're dealing with greater calm, with greater poise, with greater confidence. And so that's the beauty of this work, is that when we acknowledge that there is this sense of self that was probably created many, many years ago and for whatever reason got put on a shelf, hey, why not now? Why not start talking about and thinking about that version of self again if it has been a while since you last spoke about that person?
I have so many questions. Literally fireworks going off in my head. The first thing I want to acknowledge is this feeling as soon as you mentioned optimal self and how it starts when you're younger and you kind of put it on the shelf. And why are you not showing up that way? The first thing that I felt inside of me was this essence of, oh my gosh, some things that I actually want to express to be my optimal self, I'm leaving at the door because I've labeled them as bad, like assertiveness or, bitchy. Like we label them these things. And so that was the first thing I kind of felt in my heart. I want to acknowledge that publicly, invite the audience to think about what they heard in that as well. The other piece I'd like to unpack with you is around the concept of when you decide to shelf these desires. We're not psychologists, but let's just your hypotheses and what you've experienced in your own personal life and work. What do you think the connection may be with that and like feelings of unworthiness or self-doubt as you move through the rest of your life with that on the shelf?
Yeah, I think what happens is as individuals, we can become a result of the focus we put on results. Like when we focus on results and we're so result oriented, and I'll just really kind of shed a little bit of light on my journey as an Olympic swim coach. Is for me, here I was in an environment as an athlete first, and then I just kind of tripped and stumbled into coaching too. It was never the plan. I was a communication media degree. I had all this idea of broadcasting and media and all this kind of stuff. And I had surgery right after I was done with my competitive career. And as I was just healing from surgery, and I'd come by practice and check out the team, see how they were doing, I just started dropping some nuggets at athletes. And before long, I saw this connection. I was like, oh, wow, coaching. I never thought of this. This could be cool. And so I stayed and got a master's degree in management and kept coaching through that. And then 10, 12 years later, I blinked and, I've been coaching at the highest level of swimming for over a decade. And the whole time I was in that space, it's all about results. It's all about results. How fast did you swim? How much better did you get this year? And before long, you focus so much on the result that you stop thinking about you. You stop thinking about how even you get to the result, especially the costs that are associated with it. And for me, the big turning point came, ironically, when I had my greatest achievement. I had my greatest achievement in 2021. I was coaching at Louisiana State University. I put LSU's first ever U.S. Olympic swimmer on an Olympic team. We hadn't even sniffed that. It was nothing we'd even gotten close to in the many years of the program. And we pulled it off, myself and this athlete. And within literally 48 hours, I'm still at the Olympic trials. I'm stood around. I'm like, this doesn't feel like I thought it would feel. I don't feel like I'm at the top of a mountain right now. I'm in so many ways, figuratively, within this career, I am at the top. I put a swimmer on the hardest Olympic team you can put a swimmer onto. And I don't feel better than for doing it. I don't feel more accomplished for doing it. In fact, I feel so clear for the first time that as a person, an individual, I've been neglecting myself in terms of what's best for me for a super long time. And again, it was in the reality of the result that I was able to suddenly just see myself in this mirror for the first time and go, dude, you've been so focused on the results around you. You've forgotten about the result of self. You've not been thinking about that for years. And it just all kind of hit me like a ton of bricks right there, still at the Olympic trials. And within 2 months, I was out. I was done with the career, started my own thing and building what I have today. Just simply through a sense of realization that, hey, if we're not pursuing our best self, if it's about the results around us and it's not about the self, then what do those results really mean? And so for me, that's that's where it all started for me. And that's the kind of how I get to where I am today and be so clear about the importance of this work today as well.
Do you think you could have achieved what you did if you had spent more time on yourself in that process?
I do. The fact of the matter is the environment itself just doesn't pertain to you doing that. It's such an accelerated environment. You are on a non-stop running treadmill.
Right.
And that's the saddest part now looking back on it. It really is. It's so hard to look back. Like there's so much I have to thank for that. Literally the life I have today, where I live, the woman I'm married to, all these things is because of the sport of swimming. Nothing that's happening in my world today would not be happening without the sport of swimming. However, I get to now look back on it and see all the issues with it in terms of folks not operating at their best self in service of optimal performance. That can't make sense, right? Like, how can that possibly make
oxymoron.
sense? It's like we're all sacrificing ourselves as the facilitators of optimal performance. There's something wrong there. The equation doesn't work. And so for me, I just happen to believe that if and when, and I truly believe it is a matter of when I go back to the world of elite sport in this work that I do today, I now get to speak from that perspective that we can press pause way more often than we're willing to press pause. We can look in the mirror way more often than we're currently looking in the mirror. And if we do that, I guarantee you that not only the results will get better, but the journey towards achieving those results will be so much more fulfilling as we go through it as well.
I hear this a lot because my kids are younger, one's in middle school and they're in sports, and there's this whole travel team concept now that didn't exist when I was younger. Do you think this whole idea of like hearing stories about kids that play elite travel ball or, elite swimming, and then they go to college and they just crap out their second year and lose their scholarship, do you think it's a result of what you're describing? It's all performance and no self?
Yeah, it is. And the sad part is that story that you just shared there is the majority. And we, as an environment, as a culture, we focus on the minority in terms of the folks that don't crash out, that don't burn out. And we assume that, hey, that's the example that my child needs to also go and pursue. And it's like, well, for some reason, they didn't break. For some reason, the walls didn't come crumbling down and they were able to somehow get through it all and get to where they are in their respective professional sport today. So good for them. However, it's why, let's just stay on my sport, for example. It's why someone like a Michael Phelps can go through what he went through, and now he doesn't shut up about the severe mental toll it took on him. He literally walks on stages now to talk as much about the mental health side of the swimming as he does in any other capacity, because he's experienced it and he knows that all of that success, while in some ways worth it, he could have done it a different way. He could have talked to himself differently. And so if the greatest is saying this, why are we not listening? Why are we not listening?
It's very self-sacrificial.
Yeah. It is. And I think we've, again, like you alluded to earlier, neither of us we're not psychologists here or anything else. And so for me, what I tend to emphasize is that when I look at this sometimes sacrificial self, I like to describe it as the all or nothing mindset, which I think we can all be victims of. And I've been in therapy now for going on almost 9 years. And for me, the first hour maybe of therapy, my therapist was able to be like, well, Steve, you are a complete, 100% representation of what it looks like to be all or nothing and living life through this all or nothing lens. And that kind of worked for me when I was an athlete. Would I go back as an athlete now and maybe have a few words of some of my decisions? Probably. But it did serve the athlete in many ways that I became and was able to, I can now look back on. But in terms of life, in terms of career, in terms of family, in terms of faith, all this is not realistic. Like you say, it's not realistic. And it wasn't serving me. It was a great example of this was like my dating history. I would just go on first dates and be like, you're not marriage material. I'd be like, what a horrible pressure to put on this poor woman that I would be on a date with, to be like, if you don't pass the test on date one, Steve can't see you as wife material. And I was like, good grief, man. Like, that's not fair. That's not fair on her. That's not fair on you. And I think about like, that's how I was showing up in every capacity of life. Yeah. And so it's, it's funny now I get to, when I look at the history of my own marriage, is that how much all or nothing has been removed from that, and how much just being able to be present and consider everything and never over assume or anything like that. And that's the beauty of this work, is that you now see this like, oh, this is what the result can be. Like when you actually get it right in terms of the process and the approach, gosh, this is incredible what you can actually get in terms of the fruit.
Yeah. If you did not live in Louisiana, I would say that I think we might have had the same therapist, because I was told the same thing
Right.
probably about 5 years ago. And I remember she told me something similar. She said, Kendra, you only know how to live really close or really far, and life happens in the middle. And
Yep.
that's the part that's most uncomfortable, and you need to learn to live there. A lot of my life has been about either knowing how to be really close where I feel safe and secure, it's predictable, or like, oh, I'm really far away and I'm just removing myself. But I didn't know how
Right.
to live comfortably in between without anxiety. So
Absolutely.
this is a great segue into self-doubt. My mental model of self-doubt, I call it the spectrum of self-doubt. Everything from healthy inquiry on the left to full-blown imposter syndrome on the right. My theory is that we vacillate on that depending on context. Who are we with? How are we feeling? And I'd love to hear your thoughts around self-doubt and imposter syndrome.
Yeah. The firstly, just awesome that you're doing that. I think secondly, the word spectrum immediately jumps out at me, because the point that your therapist was making there, the too close, too far. It's like,
Oh, wow. I didn't even think that. Yeah.
right. And so like for me, but here's the point, is that I actually, when I was coaching athletes, I would always reference this spectrum, because athletes lived on both ends of the spectrum and never anywhere in between. If they had a performance, it was either incredible in their eyes or it was terrible. And as a coach, try in either of those states. One of them is like they thought it was incredible, so they're on top of the world and there's nothing they can do better. And I was like, okay, well, they're not very receptive to feedback, right? And then on the other side, terrible, it's just like, well, is this a good time to tell someone how to do something better? Probably not. So it's just like you sit there as a coach and be like, how about we just give it 10 minutes? You go do your thing, and then when you're ready for feedback, you come back. And I learned that super early, fortunately, through the world of coaching. And I think about it now in the work that I do, and the spectrum is so powerful, because the word that, to go back to the initial question now, the word doubt has just been what I've referenced in the world of performance and how we treat ourselves. Kendra, it is a cancer. It is a cancer, and I don't use that word sparingly. I know what that word means to so many people, and it is that detrimental in our minds. And doubt in the world of sport, for instance, will cripple an athlete in the most inopportune times. And the hardest thing I've noticed in the business world, let's stick in the business world. In the business world specifically, is that as folks show up and we get so results oriented, if we can just qualify that the result is good enough, we're never going to do any work around the doubt that we're plagued with to get that result. And I can use my journey, in my short journey in many ways of entrepreneurship, is all on entrepreneurship is like 80% doubt. Like it's just this giant bag of doubt. And you just look at it every single day and you go, okay, am I going to go into the bag today? Or am I just going to try to figure out a way to distract myself? Now, any therapist and true professional in the psychological space will probably tell me to do some work around that. But I just want to acknowledge that that is how present doubt is. Now, what I believe in when it comes to doubt is that it's not something to necessarily overcome and never have ever again. I think it's unrealistic. I think we have to just kind of have this, it's kind of what I've coined as resistance in my work, is that we have this internal resistance. And instead of just ignoring it, and then when it comes up being like, shoot, it's back again, to actually befriend it, to get in bed with it and just say, hey, you know what? You're not going anywhere. You're around, and you're probably going to be around for a heck of a long time. And I would rather get to know you. I'd rather get to understand what it is that brings you out. I'd rather get to know what it is that is, what the impact, that you're going to potentially have on me at the most inopportune time, so that I can be on the lookout for those inopportune moments. So again, that befriending of the doubt, that befriending of the resistance, it almost allows us to create a comfort around it and not see it as this big taboo item in our world. And it's like, you know what? You're part of the ride, doubt. You're part of the ride, resistance. You're part of the ride, self-critic. You're coming with me. Now, if I get to know you, I can actually then start to understand you a little bit more. And if I can understand you a little bit more, then I can probably operate and perform even with you at times as well. And so that's how I look at it. It's how I've always looked at it. There's certainly a spectrum with all of these sort of things, just to go back to what it is you're working on and bringing to us. But that for me is the key, is like that bag as an entrepreneur. I sit down with it every single day, and I know it's not going to go anywhere because so much of entrepreneurship is living in the unknown, and you can't help but deal with doubt in that world. So instead of just acting like it's not there completely, how about we just get to know it enough and choose when it's going to be a problem and when we can maybe do a bit of a better job around overcoming it, you know?
Absolutely. And I mean, it's been my own personal experience, and I've also seen it with clients, that the more you ignore something, the louder it gets.
Right.
And so it's, again, not a psychologist.
That's like a parent. That's just like that's parenting 101. The more you
right.
ignore the child, the louder they get.
So true. But even in our own mind, it's like if you keep, ignoring a feeling or an emotion or a reaction and you stuff it, it's going to get louder and louder. And so, I am going to be having some scientists and psychologists on this program. So I look forward to hearing what they have to say about it. But my initial theory is that, well, the more you stuff it down, that's where it starts to move, to the right on the spectrum. And that's how you work your way to imposter syndrome. You're just not, you're not just born with imposter syndrome. It's seeds, right? And that seed grows as you move along this spectrum. And if you don't, to your point, allow yourself to acknowledge what's happening and to pause and to, take care and realize it's befriend it, I think was the word you used, which I loved. Yeah. I often try to look at it as it's just information. It's just here to tell me like what needs attention and love and, care and time or whatever you want to call it. And so I really like that strategy because I think so many of us try to, not now, later. Yeah. Well, there's never a good time. No. There's never a good time, right?
No, and I think that that's why those moments in private are so important to do the work. And again, I think in our quietest times when no one's around, again, let's go right back to entrepreneurship. It's me, myself, and I running this thing. And so in those quiet times, that is when we're most likely to let the doubt, to let the self-critic, to let the resistance, as I call it, creep in and really overwhelm us and start to pick us apart. Mm-hmm. And that's the time to do the work. That's the time to sit down and ask the questions like, why do I feel doubt right now? Just get to the heart of the why straight away. Why am I doubting myself in this moment? Why am I questioning that this is going to happen or this is not going to happen? Where's that coming from? Is it coming from me right now in this moment? Is it a story from 10 years ago? What is it? What's causing that doubt? And suddenly you start to look at this thing in front of you and you actually start to see it sort of a form in your hands. And you're like, this is a thing. This is something that I actually can control and get to know, like I say, befriend. And by befriending it, we suddenly get this intimacy with it too. And I am so comfortable now with those moments of doubt to where I just step into curiosity right away. It's like, what's this about? Where's this coming from, Steve? Why are we questioning everything right now? You were so sure 2 days ago that this is what you were supposed to be doing, and now we're not sure of any of it. Something's happened. What's happened in the last 2 days? Let's look at this and think it through logically. And that's hard to do, right? But I think starting immediately with that support of a therapist, of a coach, or whatever it is a great place to start. But there's still that element of ownership and accountability that comes with the person to sit in those private moments and do the work there and then, so that when you are in those more public moments, you kind of create your own operating system for how to deal with it as and when it comes.
Yeah, that's such good advice. How do you work with leaders who come in once they hit this VP level, they feel like they're supposed to operate at a different standard and suddenly they're not supposed to have self-doubt, or if they do, they're not supposed to show it because they're worried about how it's going to impact the team?
Yeah, I always look at leadership as just this step-by-step thing, and it's like you look at the next step and you go, I want to get there. And then you get there and you look down at the step you just came from and you just go, I felt like I had it all figured out down there, and now I'm just like, where the hell am I? What just happened? And so I wanted this, and now I'm here. I don't know what to do with this. And a big part of my sort of positioning and core focus now in the work that I do is I sit down with clients and I just say, listen, my hope in our work is that I'm going to position your people to be high performers within a high stake environment. I like to put it that way. And the reason I put it that way is that firstly, we focus on positioning the person. Like, where are you right now? Like, where are you in your career right now? But before we get too far along with like, how do I become a high performer in this environment? Let's acknowledge the stakes. Let's acknowledge the environment that we're in. And this might be new, whether it be high growth, like we've grown a whole bunch. And so let's acknowledge that what was a year ago is no longer. Maybe it is people that started in the company from its outset, and now the company is now 10x the size. So this person that was just responsible for a little bit of work at the beginning is now responsible for people. And it's like, holy smokes, like I didn't know I was getting into this to be responsible for people. It's like there's a lot of stakes that come with that, right? And so let's just get clear and comfortable with the stakes first, define those before we start trying to figure out who we are and how we show up and what's best for us. And oh, that person looks like they've got it figured out, and I don't feel as though I have anything figured out. But for all I know, they may be dealing with the same story in their mind. They're just better at showing it. They're just better at hiding it, whatever it might be. So I think for me, when I think about the imposter component and these leaders that are leveling up, maybe at a rate that seems almost uncomfortable at times, how are you making the space to simply position yourself to acknowledge what's changing around you, what's happening around you, and how much are you absorbing that first before you even start about thinking about how you show up and how you influence it? Because getting to the heart, and this is what I love about the mission of the show, is how can we be an authentic leader? We have to, the only leader that is going to be the best version of you is the authentic leader. There's no book, there's no leader around going to make you the best leader you can be if it means it comes at the sacrifice of your authentic self. And so the authentic self can only come out if you get comfortable with the environment that you're in and the people that you're around. So focus on the environment and the people, and then start to do the work on yourself as you get more and more comfortable with all these moving parts and all these things that are happening around you. And I guarantee you, you'll at least hold on to some sort of slither of authenticity then, as opposed to, and this is where we step into all this imposter syndrome, we let go and we lose sight of who we are, and we get so caught up in this version of something else that we assume we're supposed to be.
When people feel it, and as you said, get close with it, get curious, ask questions, how much of that do you think could potentially be solved with skills, knowledge, and support?
I'd love to put like a number on it. I mean, it's a yes and no, right? It's somewhere on that scale. Go out to the scale, right? But it's kind of low on the scale for me. Like it's important. Like you should go on a seminar and you should go do this course and you should read these books. They're super helpful and they provide you an opportunity for greater context and understanding.
Mm-hmm.
But the one thing, whenever someone recommends me a book, I always sit there and I go, "You recommending this to help me better understand something, or you recommending this because you're suggesting that there's something I need to work on about me?" And I'm just like, and so I'm always just like, I'm interested. And so typically, sometimes I'll even ask that question, like, what's the reason for the recommendation? And just try to get to the heart of that first. And typically it's more of the former than it is the latter, which is good. And kind of where I'm going with this is like, as you read a book and you go through a course, it's not about learning it to change who you are and become what it is they're teaching. It's about looking at it and saying, in this can serve me and allow me to keep doing what it is I'm already doing at a higher level. And for me, that's where the beauty of coaching comes in, right? I mean, people ask me all the time, do you do leadership training? And I'm like, no, I don't, because how Steve leads is not how you should lead. It's just not. But do I do leadership coaching? Absolutely. I come in and I sit down and we discuss concepts and I create a shared space where we can actually get to know the true issues that these people are dealing with and have conversations and be vulnerable around that. And as you know, Kendra, in our work, like that's where the real growth happens. But more than anything, that's where the likelihood of retainment and application long-term happens too, because people are owning the development of it. So again, to your question, like, how much does that education help us? It helps us, but we shouldn't be relying on that to become what it is we're trying to become. It should be a guiding principle. It should be some food for thought. It can help navigate a few things, but the work we're doing on ourselves and the ownership around that has to be the driving principle at all times.
Yeah, so true. I've seen some clients where it very much is, I need to go get more knowledgeable about this topic before I can actually feel good about being promoted to VP. So I'm going to go get a certification on that and then I'll feel better. So I've seen it work very effectively when they take the time to get genuinely curious and whatnot. On the flip side, I've heard stories of people who are like, I'm just not ready to go and do this career. And he's like, what do you mean you're not ready? I'm just not ready
Right.
yet.
Yeah. And it's that, for me, it's always about the retainment piece. I mean, I don't know. I never want to assume that everybody, because I don't consider myself a great student. And I don't think I ever was. I may have a couple of teachers that would say otherwise, but the odds are not in my favor, let's say, when it comes to the quality of student that Steve was over the years. And the fact of the matter was that whenever I would learn something to pass something, I would not retain something. I was learning to pass.
That was your goal.
Yeah, I wasn't learning to retain because I wasn't passionate about the work, most importantly. Now, if a leader is just like, hey, I know I need to do a better job at connecting with my people and communicating with my people, and I want to take ownership for that, and I want to go find my course, the likelihood of the education being more impactful, obviously, is greater in that regard. However, if that leader then says, hey, now that I've done the course, I'm better equipped, chances are every single month that goes by following the course, they are less and less equipped, because at a certain point, if that was the goal, I'm doing the course to check the box, the retainment is so unlikely. And that's the beauty of a podcast like this. Never mind coaching. Let's just talk about what we're doing right. Two people having a conversation like this, forcing people to think differently, and for someone to hopefully introspectively, as we're talking, say, dang, this British guy's talking about something that, had I not just taken a moment and thought about this myself, I may not have had this kind of clarity around it. What do I want to do with that observation? What do I want to do with that awakening that has been provided because of this conversation? And that person immediately is so much better off than a person that just said, I've been made aware that I have this problem and I need to go do some training on it. It's two completely different approaches to the retainment and the appreciation for the work.
Yeah. Appreciate you calling that out, because that's a really important distinction. Now that you say it, that's really helpful for me personally.
I feel like you're probably a much better student than I am, though. So I'm gonna put that one out. And I was the younger brother to a grade A student in my sister, and every single teacher that she had, I had growing up, and they would look at me like, "You're Caroline's younger brother. We expect big things." I'm like, "Great, you're gonna be all super disappointed," because I'm like those subjects that she cares about getting the A in science and math and English, and it's like, I want to do sports studies, I want to do theater studies. She doesn't want to do those things. And I guarantee you, if we look at sport, if we look at getting on a stage and doing something, like, you couldn't compare us, and if you were to compare her the same way you learn from me, then you would be doing her a disservice. And that was what I lived with growing up, much younger. And that's so much truth in that. And that you talk about imposter syndrome, it starts earlier than when we even know what imposter syndrome is, before we're even introduced to the concept.
I definitely agree with that. If we go back to your swimming days, before you had all this wisdom you have now, how did you work through feelings of like nervousness or self-doubt as you were getting ready to compete?
Yeah, it's funny. Like, preparation was just everything. And for an athlete, you talk about doubt. So many athletes will be able to appreciate this. Like, you can go through a training cycle, typical training cycle in an Olympic sport, say 3, maybe 6 months, depending on how you look at it. And the whole time you can almost be convincing yourself, like, I'm doing what I need to be doing. And then come that sort of phase of rest, and then you go into the big competition, and doubt really creeps in. It tells you everything about how you truly felt about your preparation. And it forces you to respect how you prepared differently so much more when you go into that next cycle. And that's how I would always assess what I knew was coming. I actually got really comfortable with that around the age of sort of 19, 20. I spent most of those teenage years, as most teenagers do, in that all or nothing, like I was describing to you before. It's either terrible or it's fantastic. And then I actually found the use of the spectrum in my later years. I swam until I was about 22, 23 years old. So in the world of Olympic sports, that's pretty old. And so there I was in those last 2 or 3 years, just really comfortable knowing as I'm warming up for a major event, I kind of knew what was coming already. I was just like, this has been a great phase of training. I feel great. I know this is going to be good. And there's no better feeling in the world when you're just sort of going into a competition being like, I don't know how all you feel about your preparation. I can just tell you that I'm going to be phenomenal today. Like, I know I'm going to be phenomenal based on the cycle of training I've had. And that's where we start to use the imposter syndrome almost to our advantage. We can use it as a teacher. We can actually come through a phase of doubt and be like, okay, doubt kind of crippled me during that competition, for instance. But what did that doubt represent? Well, the doubt represented some sort of breakdown of consistency in my preparation. So what do I want to do with that? Do I want to just assume that I'm going to get it right next time? Or do I really want to do some analysis and say, what was it that wasn't good about that? What is it that needs to be good about this next phase? And like I said, you talk about the wisdom. Like, I didn't see it like that. As I couldn't articulately just explain it the way I just did 20 years ago. But that's what I was doing. Like, for me, I was sort of playing this role of student and allowing the doubt to be a teacher. And it was helping me always learn how to better just execute my training cycles so that I would then be able to show up better. And then also know within the training cycle that, hey, no matter what I do from this point on, because of what's already happened, it's going to be a really tall order for me to get to where I want to be at the end of this, and find comfort in that, and not like use that as a way to start scrambling and overwork and do too much, but just sort of know what might be coming and then say, okay, now it's about making the best of a situation that's not ideal, So that's, again, going back to your word spectrum, that's what I love about it. It's like we can play and dance on that spectrum when we allow ourselves to befriend the doubt and then get so comfortable with it to where it becomes a teacher potentially for us as well.
It's so helpful because I know when I personally have worked with some leaders, so they say, well, I never feel doubt. But I think there's probably not a human being that has, at some moment does not have doubt about something. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. But you've got some kind of doubt. And so they really double down on that and stonewall. And it makes it hard because then they're not coachable. We both know how that can go or doesn't go for that relationship. So that can make it really challenging. I like these ideas that you're putting forth, because my hope is that through this podcast and conversations like this, we can start to normalize it and start to make it not such a stigma with this idea of imposter syndrome or self-doubt, or even the feeling of like, gosh, I just don't feel worthy of this promotion or this award I got, or great opportunities to stop and look at, why am I feeling that way? Like you said, get really curious. And then start to realize, is this an old story? Is this someone else's voice I'm hearing in my head? Is it because maybe that one time I actually did connive to get a promotion and I never really dealt with that? I didn't come clean and now I feel guilty about this one. I mean, you got to come clean with yourself. And I think that that's where a lot of this festers.
For sure. I think something you're alluding to again here is where I can tie it back even to elite sport, is like that person that's somehow connived their way to getting a certain position within an organization. In many ways, while they did what was required to get it, then they live with this, when am I going to get found out? Like, when not in terms of what necessarily got me here, but more so like why they're maybe not equipped to handle what it is they're now responsible for. Mm-hmm. And this kind of goes back even to what you were saying before about what you're experiencing with your kids now and how you're being encouraged to like, hey, play year round, it's all in and all this kind of thing, is that we have these exceptions to rules that we then allow the exception to almost be the guiding light of how we should all be doing it. And it's so false, and it's such a shame that we get caught up with that story sometimes, is that we see this person who's 28 in a position of power and there's a bunch of 30, 40, 50-year-olds who are their direct reports, and it's like, man, if you do it the way this 28-year-old did it, you should be where he or she is at that point of your career too. And it's like, no, that's the exception. That's the exception. And if you're going to allow yourself to be influenced by the exception, then yes, you're going to have doubt. Yes, you're going to have imposter syndrome, all this kind of stuff, because you're not looking at the situation for the reality that it is. That is in fact the exception that you're experiencing and that you're seeing, And so for us, I think whenever, because this happens a lot, it's like, are you feeling any doubt lately? And oh, no, I'm good. And then they'll start telling you a story, and like, kind of sounds like doubt. Why is it you're not owning the fact that this is doubt? And again, it's that way of owning that you're maybe, for whatever reason, not equipped or whatever it might be. And that is like an admittance of failure of some sort. And it's like, going back to the exceptions of the rule, we have these 5-star high performers that can make it look like failure is not even a thing they ever experience, but that is the exception. That is the exception. Again, Michael Phelps, you would think based on 18 gold medals, that guy never loses. That guy never fails. He has way more swims at the Olympic Games that were not gold medals than were gold medals. So it's just but are we going to call those failures? No, because we're focused on the 18 gold medals. This guy never fails. And so I want to be as good as him and never fail. It's just like, it's not realistic. He's the exception. He's the exception, you know?
Yeah. Not failure, but learning. It's important to how we integrate the learning, what we're learning about ourselves in the moment and situations, and how we can change and adjust so we can do it better next time.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's also something that you're saying, around the normalization of it, is to remove the stigma. I think we need to stop looking at it as a weakness. And I've often said your imposter syndrome can be your superpower. So I think, and you said that too. So I'm glad we agree on that. And I think we need to look at ways that we just stop letting leaders get away with the cop out of it being a weakness. Yeah. I think that's just a way for them to not want to look at it.
Yeah, and that's the responsibility of the leader at the top, right? And that's the space that you and I are operating in so often. And you just go, okay, how can I help you get way more comfortable being a model for what it looks like to admit doubt, to acknowledge some of these insecurities that you maybe have to deal with in your position? One of my favorite questions that I ask all clients, I have this little 4-question worksheet that they get right within 24 hours before every session. And I got really lucky with this awesome acronym when I first started my business. There's this old saying in British language, the word Slade. And the word Slade, S-L-A-D-E, is like this little valley. It's just a little valley. And it's an old-time word that is probably never used today. But I broke it down into stuck, lost, avoidant, doubt, and excuse. And it's like, so all 5 of those things can lead you into some form of a little dip, a little bit of a valley. And for me, I ask that question every single time. And the one thing I tell everybody is that you better never answer that question with, don't think I've got any of those going on right now, Steve. I'm all good. Like, if you answer that like that, we have no reason to meet as far as I'm concerned. We can skip today. And that's kind of what I tell them. It's like, you've already paid for the session. So if you turn around and tell me you can't think of one area in everything you've had going on the last 3 or 4 weeks where you're stuck, lost, avoidant, doubtful, or making excuses, then you're not paying attention and you're not doing the work.
You're not human.
Being able to put a question like that in, and someone very now and again, I'm just like, okay, you're just telling me now what I want to hear so that I don't tell you that our session's off for today. But for me, it's like that is where I try to put it front and center, is that if we're not discussing this in some way, shape, or form every single time we meet, then we're not doing a disservice to who you are as a human being, and we're certainly doing a disservice to your people and the culture of your organization if you're not owning this stuff every single time we meet.
I like the fact that you make them own different aspects of what someone may call failure, as well as maybe different words that resonate with them, because I could see how in my own life, maybe stuck and lost, I could actually probably put the same thing. You know what I mean? It's just what word I resonate more with. So you're giving them that flexibility, and I'm sure you can learn a lot about people from getting those answers, as well as people who are resistant to putting anything on the sheet. And then when they finally do acquiesce, what do they go with first? Because that's obviously the one that they're more comfortable with admitting. And what's the one that they are like the least comfortable, like is stuck, like the worst thing possible, or excuse.
Right. And again, that's the beauty of it. When I first came up with it, I was just looking for ways to make sure we always had something to talk about. And as I've built the business, I've really put an emphasis. It's the 3rd question every single time. And it's such an easy question for them, because the first 2 are more around what we discussed last time, what we need to discuss today. The last one's always about like 6 months from now. And then that one always, and the best part about it is the amount of times now as they've gotten familiar with me, they'll just say, Steve, man, I hadn't even thought about any of this stuff. And then your damn worksheet comes my way. And I see this question and I go, oh, man, for 2 weeks, I have been stuck. I've been really stuck, and I haven't even acknowledged it until I saw this damn question. And now I'm just like, all I can think about is how stuck I am on this one thing. So on one side of it, I completely agree with you. Like it is a way to get to know the client, and just like, which one of these 5 is the thing that is somehow least disarming for you, right? And then on the other side of it, it's this complete baseball bat over the head sometimes. I'm just like, oh my gosh, I've been making excuses about X, Y, and Z since we met. And I'm just realizing now that all I've done is kick a can down the road for 3 weeks. And now I have to own that and talk to you about that. And that's when you know you're starting to make those real sort of growth, those real steps of growth with the client, when they start to see it as a powerful insight and not a reason to sort of say, oh no, I don't want to talk about this. This is a problem. I've failed.
Yeah.
And I love that insight too from you, is like all 5 of those words could be synonymous with failure. But if I was to use the word failure and say, hey, how have you failed in the last 3 weeks? No one's going to answer that question. No one's going to answer that question, right?
Yeah, and that's what I love about coaching, and I'm hearing that you do in your work, is there's really no question that a client can get out of.
Right.
And it's not because I'm deliberately trying to do gotchas or make anyone look bad or judge
Sure.
them. I don't want this to come across that way at all. But in service of them, we
Yes.
are not letting them get in their own way.
Right.
And so the mere fact that maybe a client didn't do the sheet and then you go to the call, well, they're stuck. Like, it's just the irony of it.
I didn't have time.
They don't know what to think
Right.
of,
I
they're
didn't have
making
time for the
excuses
sheet.
as to why they didn't do it. Right.
That's right. I love it.
I love it. Steve, thank you so much for spending time with me today. I always enjoy talking with you and learning from you and with you, and it's just been such a pleasure. How can the audience learn more about you and purchase your book?
The book on Amazon, Shock the World. It's the story of the athlete that I referenced earlier, and then I pull in like 16, 17 stories from my podcasts, which you can find Growth Ready podcast, and that is on all platforms where a podcast can be listened to, YouTube as well. And then finally, I just love connecting with people. You can do that at Coach Steve Mellor on Instagram. You can find me on LinkedIn if you just search for my name. You can go to my website, Growth Ready, but honestly, website's there for the sake of a website, right? At the end of the day, I love connecting with people. So reach out to me through one of those platforms. If anything that I said to you was in any way resonated with you, I'd love to learn.
Yeah, that's wonderful. And you do one-on-one coaching as well as team coaching and speaking.
That's right. Yes, I am a professional speaker. I need nudges from my fellow professional speakers like yourself, Kendra, from time to time to remind me of that. But I am an executive coach for one-on-one group coaching. The group coaching stuff is something, and maybe you can relate to this, but until you actually start doing the group coaching, you can't even appreciate just how powerful it is. And I've actually gravitated more to that as much as the individual stuff these days. But yes, professional speaking is also a space that I'm now officially operating in. So.
Well, thank you so much for blessing us with your presence today. I appreciate having you here, and I look forward to having you back.
Absolutely. I consider to take you up on that invite. Thank you, Kendra.
A sincere thank you for tuning into the Unworthy Leader podcast, where we embrace imperfection as the leadership strength. I hope today's conversation challenged and inspired you to lead authentically. Together, we're breaking down imposter syndrome and redefining leadership through vulnerability and courage. For show notes, bonus content, and leadership resources, please visit theunworthyleaderpodcast.com. You can follow us on YouTube at The Unworthy Leader Podcast, LinkedIn at Kendra Dahlstrom. Until next time, lead authentically.